Qui-Gon Jinn took the boy out of Mos Espa swiftly, hurrying through the crowded streets to the less populated outskirts. All the while, his eyes and mind were searching, the former the landscape of Tatooine, the latter the landscape of the Force. His instincts had alerted him to the presence of the probe droid tracking them, and his Jedi training in the ways of the Force warned him now of something far more dangerous. He could feed a shifting in the balance of things that suggested an intrusion on the harmony that the Force required, a dark weight descending like a massive stone. Once out on the desert, in the open, he picked up the pace. The Queen's transport came into view, a dark shape just ahead, a haven of safety. He heard Anakin call out to him, the boy working hard to keep up, but beginning to fall behind. Glancing over his shoulder to give his response and offer encouragement, he caught sight of the speeder and its dark-cloaked rider bearing down on them. "Drop, Anakin!" he shouted, wheeling about. The boy threw himself face down, flattening against the sand as the speeder whipped overhead, barely missing him as it bore down on Qui-Gon. The Jedi Master already had his lightsaber out, the blade activated, the weapon held before him in two hands. The speeder came at him, a saddle-shaped vehicle with no weapons in evidence, made to rely on quickness and maneuverability rather than firepower. It was like nothing the Jedi had ever seen, but vaguely reminiscent of something dead and gone. Its rider rode out of the glare of the suns and was revealed. Bold markings of red and black covered a demonic face in its strange, jagged patterns beneath a crown of stunted horns encircling its head. Man-shaped and humanoid, his slitted eyes and hooked teeth were nevertheless feral and predatory, and his howl was a hunter's challenge to his prey. The primal scream had barely sounded before he was on top of Qui-Gon, wheeling the speeder aside deftly at the last moment, closing off its thruster and leaping from the seat, all in one swift movement. He carried a lightsaber of another make, and the weapon was cutting at the Jedi Master even before the attacker's feet had touched the ground. Qui-Gon, surprised by the other's quickness and ferocity, barely blocked the blow with his own weapon, the blade sliding apart with a harsh rasp. The attacker spun away in a whirl of dark clothing, then attacked anew, lightsaber slashing at his intended prey, face alight with a killing frenzy that promised "Annie!" he screamed again, seeing the boy immobilized. "Get to the ship! Tell them to take off! Go! Go!" Hammering at the demonic-faced attacker with renewed determination, Qui-Gon Jinn saw the boy at last begin to run. no-nonsense way, nodding her understanding, telling him to hurry, taking charge of everything. When they reached the cockpit, they found 2 more men at work checking out the craft's control panel. They turned at the approach of Anakin and his companions. One wore a pilot's insignia on the breast of his jacket. Once. He was much younger than Qui-Gon, his face smooth, his eyes intense, his hair cut short save for a single braided pigtail that fell over his right shoulder. "Where is he?" he demanded. Then, without waiting for an answer, he wheeled back to the viewport and began scanning the empty flats. "I don't see anything," the pilot said, peering over his shoulder. "Over there!" The sharp eyes of the Jedi caught sight of movement just at the corner of the port. "Get us into the air and over there. Now, fly low." The man called Reek threw himself into the pilot's seat, while the others, Anakin included, scrambled to find seats. The big repulsor lifts kicked in with a low growl, the rampway sealed, and the sleek transport rose and wheeled smoothly about. "There," the Jedi breathed, pointing. They could see Qui-Gon Jinn now, engaged in battle with the dark-garbed demonic figure. The combatants surged back and forth across the flats, lightsabers flashing brightly with each blow struck, sand and grit swirling in all directions. Qui-Gon's long hair streamed out behind him in sharp contrast to the suit, racing out of the haze and leaping onto the ramp as the ship began to rise. Balanced precariously against the sway of the ship, eyes flaring in rage, he fought to keep his footing. Qui-Gon attacked at once, rushing the other man, closing with him at the edge of the ramp. They were 20 meters into the air by now, the pilot holding the spacecraft steady as he saw the combatants Qui-Gon had barely managed to scramble up the rampway and into the interior of the ship before the hatch sealed and the Nubian began to accelerate. He lay on the cool metal floor of the entry, his clothing dusty and damp with his sweat, his body bruised and battered. He breathed deeply, waiting for his pounding heart to quiet. He had barely escaped with his life, and the thought was worrisome. His opponent was strong and had tested him severely. He was getting old, he decided, and he did not like the feeling. Obi-Wan and Anakin rushed down the hallway to help him to his feet, and it was hard to tell which of them looked the more worried. It made him smile in spite of himself. The boy spoke first. "Are you all right?" he asked, his young face mirroring his concern. Qui-Gon nodded, brushing himself off. I think so. That was a surprise I won't soon forget. What sort of creature was it? Obi-Wan pressed, brow furrowed darkly. He wants to go back and pick up where I left off, Qui-Gon thought. The Jedi Master shook his head. I'm not sure. Whoever, or whatever that was, he was trained in the Jedi arts. My guess is he was after the Queen. Do you think he'll follow us? Anakin asked quickly. We'll be safe enough once we're in hyperspace, Qui-Gon replied, sidestepping the question. But I have no doubt he knows our destination. If he found us once, he can find us again. The boy's brow furrowed. What are we gonna do about it? At this point, Obi-Wan turned to stare at the boy, giving him a look that demanded in no uncertain terms, What do you mean, we? The boy caught the look and stared back at him, expressionless. We will be patient, Qui-Gon advised, straightening himself, drawing their attention back to him. Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi. The boy beamed. Pleased to meet you. Wow! You're a Jedi Knight too, aren't you? The younger Jedi looked from the boy to Qui-Gon and rolled his eyes in despair. From the entry, they made their way back down the hall to the cockpit, where Reek Ollier was at work preparing the ship for the jump to hyperspace. Qui-Gon introduced Anakin to each of those present, then moved to the console to stand next to Reek. Ready, the pilot announced over his shoulder. One eyebrow cocked expectantly. Qui-Gon nodded. Let's hope the hyperdrive works and Waldo doesn't get the last laugh. Standing in a group behind Reek, the company watched silently as he fitted his hands to the controls and engaged the hyperdrive. There was a quick, sharp whine, and the stars that filled the viewport turned from silver pinpricks to long streamers as the ship streaked smoothly into hyperspace, leaving Tatooine behind. Night lay over the planet of Naboo, but the silence of Theed exceeded even that normally experienced by those anticipating sleep. In the ornately appointed throne room that had once been the sole province of Queen Amidala, a strange collection of creatures gathered to witness the sentencing of Governor Seo Bibble. Trade Federation Viceroy Newt Gunray had convened the assembled, which consisted of Rune Hako and several other Neimoidians, the governor and a handful of officials in the Queen's service, and a vast array of battle droids armed with blasters to keep the Naboo prisoners in line. The Neimoidian was seated in a mechno chair, a robotic walker that bore him from one part of the room to another, metal legs moving in response to a simple touch of his fingers. It carried him to Seo Bibble and the Naboo officials now, jointed armatures working in careful precision, allowing him to remain relaxed and comfortable as he took note of the fear in the eyes of the officials backing Bibble. The governor was having none of it, however. Steadfast even now, he faced Gunray with anger and determination, his white head level, his eyes challenging. The Neimoidian glared at him. Seo Bibble was becoming a source of irritation. When are you going to give up this pointless strike? He snapped at the governor, leaning forward slightly to emphasize his displeasure. I will give up the strike, Viceroy, when your queen is lost. Your people are starving. Bibble stiffened. The Naboo will not be intimidated, not even at the cost of innocent lives. Perhaps you should worry more about yourself, Governor. Gunray cut him off sharply. The odds are good that you are going to die much sooner than your people. He was shaking with rage, and all at once his patience was exhausted. Enough of this, he exploded. Tuck him away. The battle droids moved quickly, surrounding Bibble, separating him from his colleagues. This invasion will gain you nothing, the governor called back over his shoulder as he was dragged out. We are a democracy. The people have decided, Viceroy. They will not live in tyranny. The rest of what he said was lost as he disappeared through the doorway into the hall beyond. The Naboo officials filed out after him, silent and dejected. The Neimoidian stared after them momentarily, then turned his attention to OOM-9, as the commander of his battle droids approached, metal face blank, voice devoid of inflection.
My troops are in position to begin searching the swamps for the rumored underwater villages.
OOM-9 reported.
They will not stay hidden for long.
Newt Gunray nodded and dismissed him with a wave of his hand. He thought nothing of these savages who occupied the swamps. They would be crushed in short order. For all intents and purposes, the planet was in his control. He leaned back in the Mechno chair, a measure of calmness returning. All that remained was for the Sith Lords to bring him the Queen. Certainly, they should have little difficulty in accomplishing that. Nevertheless, he knew he wouldn't be happy until this business was over. Aboard the Queen's transport, Anakin Skywalker sat shivering in a corner of the central chamber, trying to decide what he should do to get warm. Everyone else was asleep, and he had been asleep as well, but only for a short time, troubled by his dreams. He came awake to the silence and could not make himself move, paralyzed by more than simply the cold. Jar Jar slept to one side, stretched out in a chair, head back, snoring loudly. Nothing kept the Gungan from sleeping, or eating for that matter. The boy smiled briefly. R2-D2 rested close by, upright and mostly silent, his lights blinking softly. Anakin stared into the darkness, willing himself to move, to overcome his inertia. But his dreams haunted him still. He found himself thinking of his mother and home, and everything closed down inside. He missed her so much! He had thought it would get better once he was away, but it hadn't. Everything reminded him of her, and if he tried to close his eyes against those memories, he found her face waiting for him, suspended in the darkness of his thoughts, anxious and worn. Tears came to his eyes, unbidden. Maybe he had made a mistake by coming. Maybe he should go home. Except he couldn't now. Maybe not ever again. A slim figure entered the room, and Anakin watched the light of a view screen illuminate Padme's soft face. Standing as if carved from stone, she clicked on a recording and stood watching the replay of Seal Bibble's plea to Queen Amidala to come home, to save her people from starvation, to help them in their time of need. She watched it all the way through, and then shut it off again and stood staring at nothing, her head bent. What was she doing? Suddenly, she seemed to sense him watching and turned quickly toward where he crouched. Her beautiful face seemed tired and careworn as she approached and knelt beside him. He stiffened, trying desperately to stop from crying, but he couldn't hide either the tears or his shivering, and was left huddled before her, revealed. "Are you all right, Annie?" she asked him softly. "It's very cold," he managed to whisper. She smiled and removed her heavy overjacket, wrapping it around his shoulders and tucking it about him. "You're from a warm planet, Annie. Space is cold." Anakin nodded, pulling the jacket tighter. He brushed at his eyes. "You seem sad," he said. If she saw the irony in his observation, she did not say so. "The Queen is worried. Her people are suffering, dying. She must convince the Senate to intervene, or else..." She trailed off, unwilling to speak the words. "I'm not sure what will happen," she finished, her voice distant. He handed her an intricately carved wooden pendant. She studied it a moment, face lowered in shadow, then slipped it around her neck. "It's beautiful, but I don't need this to remember you." Her face lifted to his with a warm smile. boy nodded, swallowing. I know. And I won't stop caring for you either. Only I miss... His voice broke, and the tears sprang into his eyes once more. You miss your mother, the girl finished quietly. Anakin nodded, wiping at his face, unable to speak a word as Padme Nabere drew him against